for people to actually move their center of gravity up, it seems to me that a lot of the work needs to be done in the non-cognitive lines. They got to reclaim those, the hidden shadows, and they integrate that. And that, if I looked at my coaching practice, I'd probably end up talking 5% on levels and 95% of the time on lines.
Yeah.
So can you comment on?
Sure. And keep in mind that when we talk about levels, what we're really talking about is levels in some particular line. So levels are not just out there by themselves, just sort of wandering around. They're always a measure of something. So it's like inches are a measure of wood. So we don't wake up in the morning and say, I can't build the house today, I ran out of inches. Okay, you can run out of wood. So inches are sort of the levels. But what we find is that these levels are similar because they're a measure of consciousness in each of the lines. And consciousness itself could be a separate line, except it's not. It's emptiness. So consciousness is the space in which a phenomena arises at a particular level in any line. So with that in mind, when you say you weren't working on levels so much, you were working on lines, could you give me an example of the lines you mean, and then I maybe can translate with that?
Well, to be precise, I'm not just working on the cognitive line
right.
when I think of the levels. I'm working on emotional lines. I'm working on moral lines.
Good.
Like my experience has been that you can have people very cognitive, but if they haven't actually got a relationship that works, have they actually moved beyond egocentric there? And these are all, I find, very fast indicators that can, drive questioning of where they really are in the interior.
Right. One of the best definitions of cognitive, and I briefly mentioned this earlier, it's not a capacity to abstract think. It's a capacity to take perspectives. So pre-operational cognition is a capacity to take first-person perspective. Concrete operational is a capacity to take the role of other, second-person perspective. Formal operational is a capacity to take a third-person perspective. So when we say that that's not where the work needs to be done, the work needs to be done in somebody's relationship with their boyfriend or their girlfriend, or needs to be done in the moral line, or needs to be done in the interpersonal line. What we really mean is they're not living up to the potential that the cognitive line has made available to them. So they're not taking the second person's point of view. And that's the trouble with their relationship. Even though they have a capacity to take a third point, they're just stuck in the first position. So in their interpersonal line, their cognitive line is formal operational, which means they can take a third-person perspective. Most adolescents in Western cultures can do that. But many of them, their moral line is stuck at red. And that means I'm right, you're screwed up. And the problem with our relationship is you got to get your act together. This is the heroin shooting, car stealing person who's explaining to his girlfriend that she's got to get straightened out because things are really bad. So when people say that they've got work to do in these other non-cognitive lines, that's right, basically. Cognition just tends to kind of unfold up to where it unfolds for people. And you can certainly do work, and that's usually what work in middle school is all about, is by doing traditional reading, writing, arithmetic, you're really pushing these perspectives, you're taking the role of other, and so on. But then you have to fill those in. In a sense, cognition is the empty space in which all these other things have to be done in order to get traction in the real world, because that's where you make decisions, that's where you're in relationship. So all these other intelligences have to live up to their potential that cognitive has created. And so the two areas that most people end up doing a lot of work in, first of all, is when that development is occurring and parts of subjectivity are split off, then that makes a shadow. That's a hidden subject. And so that little hidden subjectivity, that subpersonality, retains the characteristics of the age and stage when it was split off. So you have your little red subpersonality running around that comes out every time you go home for Christmas. Yeah. But a lot of people that are at green, at green, they have a center of gravity at green, they have an orange subpersonality. That sort of is a capitalist pig that they split off because they can't stand that. And so green is like always reacting. All you have to do is say Enron. And green will just go completely berserk. Now, Enron, you should get upset with Enron. But you shouldn't get red in the face and have your blood pressure go up 3 or 4 points, because you're probably projecting your own shadow. And your shadow's orange in this case. That's what's so kind of right. So a lot of psychodynamic work is what people need to be done. And it goes all the way up. The Darth Vader move is possible all the way up. So you get some really sick people up there sometimes. I'd like to claim that I can represent that class.
So is it fair to say that so I can get your language right.
Yeah.
That moving up cognitively is a transformation. Filling in all those other lines, would you call that translation? Or is that still...
Yes and no. If somebody is at... Let's take Carol Gilligan so we can simplify. So somebody's at formal operational cognition, which could support a universal care moral response in a man or woman. But this woman who has this capacity for cognition is operating from the selfish level. So what she needs to do is transcend and transform and move into the care stage. So that's a vertical transformation. And so that we do have to usually have that happen. Now, sometimes what happens, and this is very common, is people have actually moved into the care or universal care stage, but they're in an environment that doesn't support it, so they sort of talk selfish and they talk tough. So actually, they've already done the transformation, but they're not living up to it. And then in a very short amount of time, you can get them up there. It might take 5 years and another 5 years if they actually had to grow, but they've already grown, they're just not in an environment supporting it. And so usually sometimes it's just some simple exercises and some encouragement, people will start living up to that. And then they can start actually pushing from there. And then pushing takes time. That's a 5-year process. You take up integral transformative practice, you do big mind practice, you do psychotherapy work, you do take the role of other, and you can push it up. In some cases, it is translation work because there are at least 2 different types of health. You can call it a sort of vertical health and horizontal health. And vertical health means that whatever level you're at, in blue or orange, green or yellow, you sort of integrated all of the vertical stages into your being. And horizontal means whatever level you're at, you're integrating all 4 quadrants at that level. So healthy red, and there is healthy and unhealthy at every stage. Healthy red is red that has integrated the quadrants at red. And blue it's integrated at blue. So a lot of work that people do in coaching as well is just making somebody healthy at the stage they're at. And that's translation. And that usually is, if somebody's at blue or at orange or at green, they're giving either too much emphasis to I, in which case at that level they're more narcissistic, they're arrogant, they're insensitive, or that often happens with men. Women often give too much relationship to we, too much emphasis to we. So they get lost in the relationship. And they're not balancing that. And then sometimes you give too much emphasis to it or just the exterior. You're not giving enough attention to your interiors at all. And it tends to be different for men and women. Women have a emotional scale of about 28 shades. And men have sort of 2 emotions, which are forward and reverse, are the sort of 2 emotions that men have. So you kind of work with what you have. And that's a lot of translative work as well. Is that covered? Do you need a follow-up?
Just the last thing. Do you think that you have to do that translative work to get the energy to make the next step to the transformation?
Yeah, see, that's exactly the point where, and I think that's so important. And again, we've talked a little bit about it. It's everybody is born, at square one. So even if we use the 7 chakras or 8 spiral dynamics or 10 levels, whatever scale we arbitrarily use, let's say the 7 chakras, there's at least 2 ways you can lose parts of yourself that are required for the climb. And we sometimes say, let's say you're given $100 at birth. That's the potential amount of stuff you have. And if you run into repeated trauma and repressions and horrible life conditions, exterior oppression and so on, even at stage 1, the physical stage, you might seal off, you might lose 10% of yourself. You might project it. You might lose touch with it. Now you've only got $90 in your account as you move into the 2nd chakra, emotional sexual chakra. Maybe you've got really stern, repressive, puritanical parents. Maybe you have some sort of trauma. Often repression is self-initiated. It's just too much for you and you're afraid and you seal it off. So you seal off another 10 units of yourself as a hidden subpersonality that, of course, is obsessed with sex, if it's at the 2nd chakra. And if it's the 1st chakra and you split it off, then you have an eating disorder. You're just obsessed with food. Because 10% of your I-ness is down there wanting to be fed. So now you've got $80 left in the bank as you cruise into stage 3. So you're starting to have less and less feeling, attention, and awareness that you have available to you. And more parts of yourself that are split off and appear as shadow, as it, as an I that you don't know as an I. And so sooner or later, maybe you're limping in with $60, and guess what? Maybe it takes 70 units of energy to get into the transpersonal. and you just can't do it. You're just stuck. So you're having peak experiences, which is great, or you can be introduced to big mind, and you're going to just not be able to hold it. You're going to keep forgetting it. It's going to keep sabotaging. So that's where psychotherapy, psychodynamic stuff comes in very, very useful. And then also just learning healthy translation at the level that you're at can help balance out and make sure that you don't lose more. Because you can see any dissociation ultimately is an imbalance between the quadrants at some point. That's that you're not integrating all the dimensions at that level. And so in that sense, it's healthy translation at each stage helps transformation. And if there's been a mistranslation, then you're misinterpreting your own interior, and so you're lying to yourself. It's like there's a textbook of Hamlet, and it's in Russian, so somebody's translating Hamlet to you, but they're lying. That's the shadow. The shadow reads your interior text and lies to you about what's down there. So you have to go back and learn to reinterpret your feelings. And that's what the West has helped to add as well.